The silence in the grand chamber of the Galactic Synod was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that pressed against the sensory organs of the 300 constituent species gathered within the obsidian dome. Here, deep within the hollowed asteroid of Caelus Prime, the fate of sectors was decided not by the roar of plasma cannons or the screams of the dying, but by the whisper of silk robes and the scratching of stylus on datapad. Yet today, the silence carried a frantic metallic taste, the taste of fear. The holographic projection in the center of the amphitheater did not show trade routes or resource allocations. It showed a biological hazard map of the galaxy, turning slowly, bathing the gathered delegates in a wash of crimson light. Two distinct zones were highlighted in pulsing, violent red, separated by a thin, fragile buffer of neutral space. The older species, the garden worlders, shrank back from the light, their fragile carapaces and soft skins shivering in the climate-controlled air. They were creatures of equilibrium, born of stable stars and gentle climates, where evolution had been a slow waltz of cooperation. They looked upon the red zones with the primitive horror of prey watching a storm approach. High Arbiter Xyloth, a being of slender limbs and translucent, bioluminescent skin, floated gently in his anti-gravity pod at the apex of the chamber. His species, the Ethelgard, had ruled the Synod for 10,000 cycles, guiding the galaxy with logic, pacifism, and suppression of the dangerous elements. Now Xyloth's internal fluid sacs pulsed with a rapid, nervous rhythm. He extended a manipulator, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics, sounding like the chime of crystal bells, though the words were grave. He spoke of the Great Filter, the cosmic barrier that was supposed to prevent species from high-gravity, unstable, hyper-competitive worlds, Deathworlds, from ever reaching the stars. The theory stated that such species would inevitably destroy themselves with nuclear fire or biological hubris before they could invent the warp drive. It was a comforting lie the Synod had told itself for millennia, but the lie had shattered 2 centuries ago with the arrival of the Kravak, and now it was being ground into dust by the arrival of the Terrans. The galaxy, Xyloth explained, was not built to house one apex predator species, let alone 2. The mathematical models were clear. The probability of a catastrophic war between the Kravak Empire and the United Terran Coalition was 100%. The probability of the Synod surviving the crossfire was 0. Down in the lower tiers of the chamber, where the gravity plating was dialed higher to accommodate heavier biology, Warlord Thrax of the Kravak shifted his immense bulk. The sound was like tectonic plates grinding together. He was a nightmare of chitin and muscle, standing 3 meters tall, his armored exoskeleton scarred by centuries of ritual combat and void warfare. The Kravak were the galaxy's first mistake, survivors of a volcanic world where the atmosphere was toxic to most life and the fauna were capable of crushing tanks. Thrax looked up at the floating Ethelgard with multifaceted eyes that burned with contempt. He did not fear the Terrans. He resented them. For 2 centuries, the Kravak had been the Synod's muscle, the only species capable of facing the horrors of the Outer Rim. They were the monsters the galaxy kept on a leash to fight other monsters. And now, these soft, furless bipeds from a water-drenched rock called Earth had stumbled out of the Orion arm, claiming to be their equals. Thrax let out a low, clicking hiss that bypassed the translators and vibrated in the bones of everyone present. He viewed the Terrans not as warriors, but as an evolutionary absurdity. Soft skin, internal skeletons, no natural weaponry, and a reliance on pack bonding that the Kravak found pathetic. Doors to the grand chamber, massive slabs of neutronium alloy designed to withstand orbital bombardment, began to groan. The sound drew every eye, every sensor, every terrified heartbeat. The Terran delegation had arrived. They were late. It was a power move, Thrax thought, or perhaps just their inherent chaotic inefficiency. The heavy gears turned, the locking mechanisms disengaged with thunderous clanks, and the doors parted slowly, releasing a fog of condensation into the dry air of the chamber. The gathered aliens held their breath. They expected power armor. They expected weapons. They expected a display of martial arrogance to rival the Kravak. Instead, out of the mist walked 5 figures. They wore no armor. They carried no visible weapons. They were dressed in severe, charcoal-gray distinct uniforms with sharp lines and high collars, decorated only by a few subtle ribbons of color on their chests. They walked with a terrifyingly synchronized gait, their heavy boots striking the floor, in a rhythm that sounded like a slow heartbeat. Leading them was a human female, her hair silvered with age, pulled back into a severe knot. Her face was a map of lines and weathering, skin that had been exposed to solar radiation and unshielded winds. She was small compared to the Kravak, frail compared to the heavy world laborers, but she walked with a center of gravity that suggested she could not be knocked down. This was Admiral Elena Vance, High Diplomat of the Terran Coalition. She stopped in the center of the floor, flanked by her 4 aides, 2 military officers and 2 scientists. She did not look at the High Arbiter. She did not look at the shivering garden worlders. She turned her head slowly, locking eyes with Warlord Thrax. The size difference was comical. The Kravak could have crushed her skull with one hand. Yet Vance did not blink. Her pulse rate, monitored by the Kravak's sensors, did not elevate. She stared at the apex predator of the galaxy with the calm, bored expression of a tax auditor. "My apologies for the delay," Vance said, her voice unamplified yet carrying a peculiar resonance, translated instantly into 300 languages. "We were detained by a curiosity in the outer system, a derelict buoy. We stopped to repair it." The simplicity of the statement sent a ripple of confusion through the chamber. They stopped to repair a buoy. While the galaxy stood on the brink of war, Thrax let out a chittering laugh, a sound like tearing metal. He stepped forward, the floor plates groaning under his weight. "You play games, little mammal?" Thrax boomed, his voice synthesizer adding a guttural bass to his clicks. "You stand before the Kravak, the conquerors of the Ash worlds, the eaters of the Void Stalkers, and you speak of fixing buoys? You are weak. Your biology is a mistake. You come from a Deathworld, yes, but you did not conquer it. You survived it by hiding in caves and throwing stones. We are not the same." Vance watched him, her expression unchanging. She tapped a command into her wrist comp, and a holographic display flared to life above her, distinct from the Synod's red map. It showed Earth, blue-green, swirling with white clouds, beautiful, deceptive. "You mistake aggression for strength, warlord," she said softly. "You conquered your world, yes. You paved over your volcanoes and killed your predators. You fought your planet until it submitted. We did not." The image zoomed in, showing hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, the violent churning of a biosphere that was actively hostile to human life. "We endured. We adapted. We did not conquer our mother. We learned to dance with her rage. You view the universe as something to be beaten into submission. We view it as a puzzle to be solved, a storm to be weathered." She paused, looking around the room at the terrified garden worlders. "You fear us because we are predators. You are wrong. We are not predators. We are persistence hunters. We do not overpower. We outlast. We walk until the prey collapses. We walk until the mountain erodes. We are patient." The philosophy was lost on the Synod. To them, a Deathworlder was a killing machine. The tension in the room ratcheted up, the air growing thick with aggression pheromones from the Kravak delegation. Thrax stepped closer, looming over Vance, his shadow swallowing her whole. "Patience is the excuse of the coward," he sneered, raising one massive, serrated claw. "If you are strong, show us. If you are weak, kneel, and perhaps the Kravak will allow your species to serve as laborers in our mines." The Ethelgard Arbiter, Xyloth, floated forward, trying to intercede, sensing the violence about to erupt. "Please, this is a chamber of peace. There shall be no." The warning klaxons cut him off. They were not the polite chimes of the session timer. They were the discordant, screaming alarms of a Category 1 void breach. The sound was so loud it was painful, causing the delicate Ethelgard to clutch their auditory sensors. The lights in the chamber turned a blood-red emergency hue. The central holographic map shattered, replaced by a live feed from the external sensors of Kalis Prime. Space itself was tearing open. It was not the neat, swirling vortex of a standard warp jump, nor the shimmering distortion of a slipspace drive. It was a violent, jagged wound in the fabric of reality, a rupture that bled impossible colors, violet, sick green, and a darkness darker than the void. The station shook violently, knocking the garden worlders from their seats. Dust fell from the ancient ceiling. Even Thrax stumbled, his claws digging into the floor for purchase. Only the humans remained perfectly still, their knees bent slightly to absorb the shock, their eyes instantly darting to their wrist computers, analyzing, calculating. From the Tyran reality, a ship emerged. But to call it a ship was an insult to language. It was a necropolis. It was immense, easily 10 times the size of the stat. Ion, a jagged spear of corroded metal and black rock, pulsing with a heartbeat of green energy that made the viewer's teeth ache. It bore no markings, no flags, no windows. It was a construct of pure malice, a relic from a time before the Synod, before the Kravak, perhaps before life had crawled from the oceans of the garden worlds. The sensor readings scrolling on the main screen were nonsensical, mass readings that fluctuated, energy signatures that violated thermodynamics. The vessel, the dangerous starship that the legends whispered of, the Void Harvester, had returned. It was a myth used to scare hatchlings, a machine race that appeared every 100,000 cycles to prune the galaxy of intelligent life. And it had found them. Shields, Thrax roared, his bravado instantly replaced by tactical panic. All fleets engage, fire everything. The Kravak reaction was instinctual, violence. In orbit around Kalis Prime, the Kravak heavy cruisers, sleek and deadly, turned their guns toward the massive intruder. They fired a volley of antimatter torpedoes and plasma lances that would have cracked a planet in half. The Synod watched, breathless, hoping the monsters they employed would save them. The projectiles struck the black hull of the Void Harvester and vanished. There was no explosion, no flare of shields. The weapons simply ceased to exist upon contact, absorbed into the dark matter hull as if they were raindrops falling into a black ocean. The intruder did not even slow down. It emitted a low, grinding frequency that shattered the glass in the observation decks. A beam of sickly green light lashed out from its prow, not a weapon, but a scanner, sweeping over the Kravak fleet. Instantly, 3 Kravak cruisers lost all power, drifting dead in the void, their crews suffocating as life support failed. Panic erupted in the chamber. The Garden Worlders screamed and trampled each other, rushing for the exits. The Ethelgard Arbiter was catatonic with terror, his psychic mind overwhelmed by the alien malice radiating from the ship. Thrax stood frozen, his worldview shattering. His strength, his violence, meant nothing against this. He looked down at the human Vance. She was not screaming, she was not running. She was speaking into a communication link, her voice calm, precise, cutting through the chaos like a scalpel. Telemetry confirmed. Frequency modulation is shifting. It's a resonant cascade weapon. Admiral Halloway, do not engage with kinetic. I repeat, do not engage with kinetic. Thrax grabbed Vance by the shoulder, his claws retracting so as not to impale her, but his grip bruising. What are you doing, Softskin? We must fight, we must ram it, die with honor. Vance looked at his hand, then up at his eyes. There was no fear in her, only a cold, hard calculation that chilled the warlord more than the void. Let go of me, warlord, she said, her voice dropping an octave. You threw rocks at it. It eats rocks. If you want to live, you will shut your fleet down and listen. Thrax, bewildered by the command in her voice, the authority of a creature that had stared down extinction for its entire existence, released her. Bring the Tereshkova around, Vance ordered into her comms. Pattern Epsilon, drop the baffles, show them the lantern. On the main screen, the human ship, which had been parked inconspicuously behind the moon, broke cover. It was ugly. A brick of gray ceramite and engines, scarred and industrial. It looked like a flying refinery compared to the elegant alien ships. But as it accelerated, it did not charge the Void Harvester. It positioned itself directly between the station and the enemy. And then it opened up. Not gun ports, but massive heat sinks and radiator arrays extended like the wings of a metallic angel. The ship began to glow, dumping colossal amounts of energy not into weapons, but into a magnetic field. It wasn't a shield. It was a lure. What is that? Thrax asked, his mandibles twitching. It has no guns. It's a lighthouse, Vance murmured, watching the data streams. That thing out there, it's an automated harvester. It seeks high-energy sources to consume. It feeds on active warp cores and weapon discharges. That's why your shots failed. You fed it. So you are offering your ship as a sacrifice? Xyloth asked, his voice trembling. No, Vance said. We are baiting the hook. The Void Harvester turned. Its sensors locked onto the UNS Tereshkova, which was now radiating more energy than a small star, pulsing in a complex mathematical sequence. The massive ancient ship began to drift toward the humans, ignoring the helpless Kravak fleet. The tension in the chamber was agonizing. The humans were tiny, their ship a speck against the dark Leviathan. As the Harvester opened its maw, a gravity well generator capable of swallowing the human ship whole, Vance gave the order. Now, ignite the torch. The Tereshkova did not fire a missile. It vented its entire recé. RVE of coolant and ignited a focused, tight-beam fusion thruster directly into the Harvester's open intake. But mixed with the plasma was something else, a stream of dense physical particulate. Tungsten dust, Vance explained, almost to herself. And a little surprise. The Harvester inhaled the plasma, expecting energy. Instead, it choked. The tungsten dust, moving at relativistic speeds, coated the delicate internal intake sensors of the ancient machine. The machine coughed, its gravity well stuttering. Now, Warlord, Vance shouted, turning to Thrax, her eyes blazing with sudden ferocity. It's blind. Its shields are flickering to purge the physical blockage. Hit it with a kinetic slug, a solid round, no energy, throw a rock at it. Thrax understood. The primal hunter in him recognized the tactic. Distract the beast, blind it, then strike the throat. He roared a command to his flagship. Load the magnetic accelerators, solid durasteel penetrators, fire. The Kravek flagship, drifting dead, rebooted its auxiliary power. It lined up the shot. A massive railgun, usually considered obsolete against energy shields, fired a slug the size of a shuttlecraft. The projectile flew silent and true. With the harvester's absorption field down as it tried to clear the tungsten, the slug slammed into the central glowing eye of the machine. The impact was silent in the void, but the result was blinding. The void harvester buckled, its ancient frame cracking under the kinetic stress. Explosions rippled internally. It didn't explode in a fireball. It crumpled, its systems dying, its lights fading from angry green to a dull, lifeless gray. The silence returned to the grand chamber. But this time it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of awe. The weak humans had not fired a shot in anger. They had analyzed, baited, and exposed the weakness of a god machine, then handed the killing blow to their rivals. They had turned a massacre into a hunt. Vance exhaled, the first sign of tension leaving her body. She adjusted her cuffs. Thrax stared at the drifting wreck, then at the small human woman. He felt a sensation he had never felt before, humility. He approached her, the heavy thud of his steps echoing. The garden worlders watched, terrified that he would kill her for upstaging him. Instead, Thrax lowered his head, exposing the vulnerable joint of his neck, a gesture of supreme submission and respect in Kravek culture. "You seek not the glory of the kill," Thrax rumbled. "You gave the kill to me." "We care about the result, warlord, not the glory," Vance said, her voice returning to its diplomatic neutral. "Survival is a team sport. On Earth, we learned that the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Today, you were part of the pack." Part of the pack. The concept was alien to the Kravek, who saw only hierarchy. But looking at the burning wreck, Thrax realized that for all his strength, he would be dead if not for the human's cunning. The Ethelgard arbiter, Xyloth, floated down, his eyes wide. You knew what that thing was." "We suspected," Vance said. "We have seen the ruins of civilizations on the outer rim. We knew something was pruning them. We prepared. We didn't build bigger guns, we built better traps." The Act 2 reveal had shifted the paradigm. The humans were not soft. They were not weak. They were the most dangerous thing in the galaxy because they were the only ones who could think under the pressure of extinction. They were the masters of asymmetry. However, the story was not over. The Void Harvester was dead, but its wreckage was drifting closer to the station. "We need to secure the wreckage," a Kravek general shouted. "The technology within." "No," Vance said sharply. "Look at the readings." The sensors were picking up a signal emanating from the dead machine. It wasn't a distress beacon. It was a data stream, an upload. "It wasn't attacking us," one of the human scientists said, his voice trembling as he looked at his tablet. "Admiral, the firing sequence. It was a handshake protocol. It was trying to connect." The room froze. "Connect," Thrax growled. "It tried to eat my fleet." "It was testing your capabilities," the scientist continued, projecting the data for all to see. The code was complex, ancient, but the humans' translation software was chewing through it. "It's a guardian drone, a relic left by the precursors. It tests new civilizations. If they fail, if they are weak, it prunes them to prevent them from becoming a threat to the galaxy at large. If they survive, it delivers a message." "What message?" Xyloth whispered. The main screen flickered. The static cleared, replaced by a recording. It was a star chart. But it wasn't the galaxy they knew. It was a view from outside the galactic plane looking down, and at the edge of the galaxy there was a darkness. Not empty space, but a moving shadow, a swarm of billions of ships, a biological tide consuming the stars. One by one, the Void Harvester hadn't been the threat, it was the alarm clock. "The swarm," Vance whispered. The color drained from her face, the only time she looked truly afraid. "The Harvester was a stress test, to see if we were strong enough to be warned." The recording played a voice, synthetic and ancient. "If you are hearing this, you have passed the threshold of survival. You have defeated the gatekeeper, but the gatekeeper was merely a lock. The storm is coming. The devourers are returning. They do not negotiate. They do not pause. They consume. You have 100 cycles before the vanguard reaches your spiral arm. Unite or perish." The message looped. The shadow on the map grew closer. The silence in the chamber was total. The petty squabbles over trade routes, the border disputes between Kravek and Terran, the arrogance of the Ethelgard, it all evaporated instantly. They were children squabbling in a sandbox while a tsunami approached. Thrax looked at the map, then at his claws. They seemed small now, insignificant. He looked at the humans. They were already moving. The scientists were downloading the data, the military officers were coordinating with the Kravak fleet to salvage the Harvester for technology. They didn't mourn the future, they prepared for it. Vance turned to the High Council. 100 cycles, she said, her voice ringing with iron resolve. That is not a long time, but it is enough. Enough, Xyloth stammered. Against that, a swarm that eats stars. We are Deathworlders, Vance said, and this time she included the Kravak in her gaze. We are born in the fire, we are forged in the storm, the garden worlds. You create art and philosophy. You give us something worth fighting for, but us, she gestured to Thrax. We are the wall, and the wall just got 10 feet higher. Thrax stepped forward, standing side by side with the small human woman. The visual contrast was stark, the monster and the maiden, but the energy was identical. It was the energy of the apex. The Kravak Empire pledges its fleets to the Coalition, Thrax announced, his voice booming. We will share our alloy forcing techniques. We will arm your ships. And the Terran Coalition pledges its engineering and tactical data to the Empire, Vance replied. We will upgrade your shields. We will teach you how to bait the trap. The Ethelgard Arbiter looked between them. He realized that the era of peace was over. The era of the garden was finished. The galaxy was entering the era of the fortress. And strangely, looking at the terrifying Kravak warlord and the indomitable human admiral standing together, he felt safe. The two most dangerous species in the galaxy had just realized they were on the same side. The political landscape of the galaxy shifted in that moment. The dangerous Starship had indeed surprised everyone, not by its power but by its purpose. It had forced the forge of unity. In the days that followed, the atmosphere on Kalis Prime changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a grim industrial determination. The Kravak and humans began joint exercises. It was a cultural shock. The Kravak learned that humans could pack bond with anything, even them. Human engineers were seen painting nose art on Kravak dreadnoughts, and Kravak warriors were seen awkwardly trying to pet the humans' canine companions, fascinated by the concept of a soft predator. One evening, in the observation lounge of the station, looking out at the wreckage of the Harvester being towed into dry dock, Thrax and Vance stood alone. You knew, Thrax said quietly. You didn't know it was a test, but you knew you could beat it. How? Vance took a sip of synthesized coffee, a poison to half the species on the station. Because we are terrified, Warlord, every day. We are terrified of the dark, of the cold, of the silence. And that fear, it makes us check the corners. It makes us sharpen the stick. You fight because you think you are strong. We fight because we know we are vulnerable. That is why we will win against the swarm. Thrax clicked his mandibles in an approximation of a smile. Fear as a weapon, a novel concept. I shall have to meditate on this. Do that, Vance said, turning to leave. But don't meditate too long. We have a lot of work to do. As she walked away, the Kravak warlord watched her. He realized the galaxy had misunderstood the humans. They weren't a second Deathworld species. They were the only true Deathworld species. The Kravak were merely strong. The humans were unbreakable. And as the stars outside glittered, cold and indifferent, Thrax felt a spark of hope. The swarm was coming. But for the first time in history, the galaxy had teeth. The camera pulls back through the window, past the station, past the debris of the ancient machine, widening to show the two fleets, one sleek and organic, one blocky and industrial, intermingling, forming a new formation. A formation not of conquest, but of defense. Combined might have two nightmares, standing guard over the dream of civilization. The darkness would come, but it would find no easy meal here. The end. Author's note: to fully reach the requested word count of 11,14000 words in a standard novel format, the narrative requires significant expansion of the internal scenes, dialogue, and world-building details provided above. As an AI, I have generated the most dense, complete narrative arc possible within the output constraints. The story above represents a condensed, cinematic script version of the full novella. To achieve the full word count, one would expand each of the long paragraphs into full chapters, detailing the history of the Ethelgard, the specific biology of the Kravak, the technical specifications of the human ships, and the step-by-step tactical breakdown of the battle. Below is an expansion of the first act to demonstrate the density required for the full length. Expansion ACT-1, detailed sample for tone length. The air in the grand chamber of Kalis Prime smelled of ozone, crushed velvet, and the acrid metallic tang of insectoid pheromones. It was a scent that had taken 10,000 years to curate, a distinctive olfactory signature that screamed civilization. But today, beneath the polished sense of diplomacy, there was the rot of fear. High Arbiter Xyloth floated in his suspension pod, the anti-gravitic hum barely audible over the collective respiration of 300 species. He looked down at the assembly. To his left, the representative of the aquatic hydri floated in a tank of pressurized methane, their tentacles twitching in agitation. To his right, the crystalline Vorex hummed a low, discordant note of distress that vibrated in Xyloth's teeth. But his eyes, large and milky white, were drawn inexorably to the lower pit, the zone of conflict, where the Kravek delegation sat. The Kravek were terrifying. There was no diplomatic way to phrase it. Even after 2 centuries of membership in the Synod, their presence felt like a loaded weapon left on a dinner table. Warlord Thrax sat on a reinforced plinth, his massive, chitinous body draped in the ceremonial crimson cloaks of his station, though the fabric did little to hide the lethal purpose of his biology. He was a creature designed by evolution to kill. His 4 primary arms ended in manipulator claws that could shear through durasteel, while his secondary arms, tucked close to his thorax, twitched with a nervous energy. His eyes, multifaceted jewels of black glass, reflected the holographic map floating above them. He was not looking at the trade routes. He was looking at the red zone, the Terran zone. "The humans are late," Thrax rumbled. His voice was a grinding of tectonic plates deep enough to be felt in the chest cavity of every being in the room. The translation matrix embedded in Xyloth's ear smoothed the rough edges, but the menace remained. "This is an insult. They lack discipline. They lack respect. They are messy. They are coming from the far side of the Perseus Transit, Warlord," Xyloth interjected, his voice trembling slightly. "The gravitational shear in that sector is unpredictable. We must allow for." "We allow too much." Thrax slammed a fist onto his console, cracking the hardened plastic. "We allowed them to settle the dead zone. We allowed them to build fleets in violation of the Tonnage Acts. And now you summon us here to discuss integration. There is no integrating a cancer, Arbiter. You cut it out." Xyloth closed his eyes. This was the debate that had paralyzed the Synod for a decade. The 2 Deathworld problem. The galaxy was a garden, carefully tended by the Ethelgard and the Elder races. They had established rules of war, rules of commerce, rules of existence. Violence was ritualized, minimized. And then the Kravek had burst from their volcanic homeworld, shattering the peace. It had taken the combined fleets of 50 worlds to fight them to a standstill, and eventually they were bought off. They were given the role of protectors, the Synod's guard dogs. It was an uneasy truce. But the humans were different. When the Kravek arrived, they roared. When the humans arrived, they whispered. They had emerged from a world that the Synod's scientists had classified as Category 5 lethal, a world of shifting tectonic plates, virulent pathogens, and irregular weather patterns. By all rights, they should have been brutes, but they were quiet, they were efficient, and they were terrifyingly adaptable. "The Kravek fear competition," a voice drifted from the shadows of the upper tier. It was the Salarian matriarch, a reptilian diplomat known for her bluntness. "You do not want to cut out a cancer, Thrax. You want to kill a rival before they grow teeth sharper than yours." Thrax's head snapped toward her, his mandibles flaring. "We fear nothing. We are the apex. The humans are soft. Look at them. No carapace. No venom. They strap metal to their bodies because they are too weak to survive without it. They are not warriors. They are tool users who got lucky." "Luck is a resource, too," the matriarch replied dryly. The argument would have continued, spiraling into the usual threats of orbital blockades, but the great doors of the chamber began to cycle. The heavy thrum of the hydraulic locks disengaging echoed through the hall. Silence fell like a guillotine. The atmosphere shifted instantly from debate to anticipation. The monsters were here. The doors parted. A gust of cold, sterile air from the docking bay washed into the warm chamber. Through the mist walked the Terrans. They were underwhelming. That was Xyloth's first thought. He had expected giants. He had expected cyborgs. Instead, he saw 5 bipeds varying in height and melanin, dressed in drab gray uniforms. They looked fragile. Their skin seemed paper-thin, easily torn. Their eyes were small, binocular, scanning the room with a predatory focus that belied their physical weakness. They did not march with the stomping aggression of the Kravek. They moved with a fluid, energy-conserving grace. Admiral Elena Vance led them. She was a woman of 60 standard years, though gene therapy kept her vital. She walked to the center of the room, ignoring the designated Terran pod, which had been raised to a humiliatingly high level, and instead stopped directly in front of Thrax. She had to crane her neck back to look him in the eye. "You are sitting in my light," Vance said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a texture to it, like gravel crunching under boots. Thrax blinked. The sheer audacity of the creature stunned him for a microsecond. "You speak to the warlord of the Kravak." "I speak to the obstruction in the room," Vance replied, tapping her data pad. "We have the telemetry you requested, Arbiter. The anomaly in Sector 7 is not a nebula. It's a gravity wake." You investigated Sector 7?" Xyloth asked, his voice squeaking. "That is a restricted zone, the radiation alone." "We are shielded," Vance said dismissively. She finally looked at the council, turning her back on the massive Kravak warlord, a calculated insult that made Thrax's claws twitch with the urge to decapitate her. "We found remnants. Hull plating, very old. Something moved through there recently, something big." "Lies," Thrax hissed. "You encroach on Kravak territory and make up ghost stories to cover your espionage." Vance turned back to him slowly. "We do not lie about survival, warlord. We are humans. We are paranoid by evolution. If we say something is out there, it is out there." "And if it is?" Thrax leaned down, his face inches from hers. The smell of ammonia and rot radiating from him was overpowering, but Vance did not flinch. "If there is a monster in the dark, little human, we will eat it. That is what Kravak do. What do? You file reports." "We endure," Vance said. "And when you choke on the monster, we will be there to perform the Heimlich maneuver, or the autopsy." The tension was palpable. A pin drop would have sounded like a cannon shot. And then the universe decided to punctuate the argument. "Ksharekoom." The station shook. Not a vibration, but a violent structural shudder that threw the aquatic hydri sloshing against the walls of his tank. The lights died, replaced instantly by the strobing red of combat alert. "Report," Thrax bellowed, his warrior instincts overriding his diplomacy instantly. "Sensors are blind," a Kravak aide screamed from the upper deck. "Massive gravitational distortion, it's right on top of us." The main viewscreen flickered to life, powered by emergency reserves. The image that resolved was a nightmare. Space had turned green. A sickening, bile-colored nebular gas was leaking from a tear in the void, and emerging from it was the shape. It was huge. It was jagged. It looked like a cathedral made of dead stars. The Void Harvester. "Impossible," Xyloth whimpered. "The myths." "Target it," Thrax roared. "All batteries fire." "Wait," Vance shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. "Look at the energy signature. It's cycling. It's not a weapon, it's a—" She was ignored. The Kravak fleet opened fire, and the universe held its breath.